Hey, you guys, this is Tired Goth, and you are tuned into the Academia Gothica official podcast. This is season 11, episode 3. Glad to have you here. Thanks so much for tuning in. Thanks so much for having me as your podcast host. This podcast, obviously, if you're new, thanks for tuning in. If you're returning, it's really good to have you here. This podcast is kind of like a smorgasbord, just so you guys know, of like tech information, spiritual warfare type of stuff. It's got a little bit of everything, right? And it's kind of, I do it that way just because like it kind of covers all bases, and it kind of draws together in a neat little package at the end of the presentation. But you're gonna get like different information from episode to episode, so it's kind of cool that way. But the most important thing that I wanted to cover today was kind of like a rehash of some information that people might already know. And I'm not really sure who knows, but I'm going to bring it back into circulation. A while ago, I want to say around like 2018 or 2019, there was some information about text messaging and how deleted text could be recovered, right? And the story came to light when some technology was unveiled during, I think it was a threat hunting situation having to do with the police. The police basically had to go through a child's phone at their school to see who they were talking to, because they were talking to a predator. And even though they deleted their messages, they went back into the roster and the cache of their messages, and they were able to retrace who it is they were talking to, and they were able to, carry out an investigation from there. Now, while that's all hunky-dory, right, the technology seemed to be framed in a good light. Like, oh, hey, look, we were able to catch someone who was preying on a child with this information, and so on and so forth. For those of you who don't know what this app or this information is called, it is called Cellebrite, Cellebrite, right? And this is basically an app that uses more traditional data scraping tools. So data scraping in general takes information that has been removed, been deleted, or otherwise been expunged from any kind of record and resurfaces it from old logs that are not usually tapped into when we're talking about data deletion services. So, for example, if you have a standard deletion protocol, it'll probably have something like a checklist programmed into it, like delete this part of the app, delete this part of the app, this part of the app. And it all coincides with the direct messenger address that you'd be, referring to or talking to. And one of the reasons why it's so important to pay attention to this is because there are parts of the message and parts of the recipient information that are not deleted. And sometimes with the cache log that's left over, you can recover everything top to bottom from those messages without it being a formal deletion. So even though there is a formal deletion occurring as an execution, as a process that says like, okay, would you like to delete these messages? That's the formality, right? And you would select yes. What happens, therefore, is the messages are deleted as one copy, which is the recipient or owner copy, but the application has a separate copy that it keeps in its server logs, its server cache. So there is sort of like a backup cache that's left over that is utilized by apps like Cellebrite, where or data scraping services otherwise not named here. So you have the unfortunate copy lingering around of these transactions, these interactions that have been occurring. And I wanted to kind of bring this back to like kind of like a reminder kind of thing, because a lot of information security data, it'll go out into the open, and then like once it's mentioned once, it'll be mentioned by a couple other parties just to like get recirculated to be reminded of, and so on and so forth. But it's the type of thing where like if you forget about it at an inopportune time to forget about something so important, you kind of don't realize how much power you're giving away by not paying attention to what is still being used. Like what happens in information security in general, or privacy practices in general, is something will happen one time, but it will remain persistent. So for example, you'll hear like a story or something like, Cellebrite was used to do X, Y, and Z, and this person was saved. Great. What happens is Cellebrite is also persistently used possibly in ways, because it's a free app, it's a free service, and it's available to the public, it's available to anyone, right? Anyone can use this. It's not just the police who are using this. This is anyone who has access to a distribution source where they can get the app. Meaning, if you have an Apple store, if you have, or like a, like an Apple app store, if you have an Android Play Store, if you have a sideload source for your apps, you can get a copy of Celebrate. So you don't have to have any credentials. You don't have to have anything like this to operate this app and to potentially stalk someone's text messages, whether or not they're present on the phone at that point. So the reason why I'm bringing this back into circulation is because there are always going to be parties, people, or, use cases that don't necessarily align with the highest good of an application of this type. And while I am famed for saying, I am probably the person that has said this, it's not the tool, it's the mind behind it. It's the mind who is using the tool that we have to worry about. It doesn't make sense to damn a tool and be like, oh, wow, this is really bad, it's really bad. It's the person or the interest, the point of interest that really shows whether or not the tool is going to be more or less threatening. So, it's like these tools can be useful, as it was in that one use case that was presented publicly, to save a person who was possibly in a more vulnerable situation than they recognize themselves to be in, right? That is a good use case for this. However, you're also going to have people who want to stalk their significant others. You're going to have people who want to stalk people they've never met. And if they have target addresses or possibly get a hold of their hardware, which is the scariest, I think, option there, because it's the most intimate, How did a person get so close to a person's phone that they could literally pick it up and start downloading their messages? It's that kind of a thing. This is the type of threat intel that needs to be paid attention to once in a while, even if it's like, oh, well, everybody knows about Celebrate. Yeah, there are some people who don't to this day. And that's the one thing about information security that is often overlooked to the detriment of it as an industry, because you're going to have people who are like competitive, they study this stuff, they get, into the information field, and they gut it for whatever cutting edge information is there, which is great because then they have the option to present it to people. But it's about the reach. It's about the reach of who actually needs this information, who is still unaware of it, who hasn't taken interest during, like, I guess, the first wave of interest. And then they're, coming back to, I guess, the information pool to see like, oh, is this still going on? Yeah, it is actually. So considering that I'm an advocate for privacy and security, it's one of those things that I like to bring up to remind people as a point of discussion, as a topical reference. When you're dealing with people who stalk, when you're dealing with people who do not understand that boundaries are necessary, and they're necessary to uphold even more so, you're going to deal with situations where apps like this are abused instead of being used within accordance of what they're actually supposed to be doing. It's the same for pen testing tools. You're going to have people who run probes on people because they have their information. It doesn't go any further into the thought than that for some people. And this is something that results in some really damaging stuff. I mean, you have people who get doxxed this way. Their home addresses and government names and dead named faces and everything like that are released to the public. There's not a normal parameter of privacy set for people who are under attack that way. And, it's not to say that anyone needs a good reason either. Some people are not able to use these tools within a mental capacity that is sound. So you have people who are, basically going around using very high grade advanced tools for information investigation. And they're like, la da 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 da, using this to stalk my ex-girlfriend because I want to know what she's wearing today. Like, just weird as fuck shit like that. Weird things that do not need to be happening, because if it comes down to a matter of priority and necessity, which is what these tools are for, you're not dealing with anyone who understands what either of those things are. And whatever the case may be, whatever the reasoning behind it is, it's not a priority. It is abuse. It's indulgence. And I feel like one of the purposes I hope that this podcast serves is creating a sort of like information boundary parameter, like, hey, this is neutral ground where you can learn where you possibly made a huge mistake. You know, I hope that I'm helpful this way. But yeah, there are tech tools that are very good, very, very good, very advanced, very great to use. And then there are people who take these tools and just kind of blow the use case out of proportion to an extent that it becomes dangerous and people become more afraid of the tool than curious about it. And this overall hinders education in it as well, because you're going to have people who want to know these types of things, but they're too scared, literally, like too afraid to tread into the territory where they could possibly improve their own skill sets. You know, it's sort of like, I liken it a bit to a person who has always wanted to go to a gun range, not because they're violent, but because they've always been curious, like, what are they for? How do I do this? What is this exactly? I've never been here, right? But again, there are people who are much more experienced, and actually this might not be even the best example for it, because the example I was going to use was like the potential for a stray bullet to hit someone while they're on the range, right? But even at a gun range, there are safety precautions very firmly set in place where that wouldn't really happen. It's more like if a person is just like wandering out into a place where people are very well seasoned with using this type of, I guess you could say, mechanical technology, right? If people are seasoned in using this kind of stuff and a person isn't, and they're just, kind of observing, right? It's not quite the same as being formally introduced with parameters, safety measures, precautions. It's a lot more dangerous. You're in literally a line of fire, or about to put yourself into one, if you're not aware of your territory, your surroundings, who's around you, who's using what, and what for, what the context of this is. And context is huge when it comes to information security, because it's actually the fine line that deciphers a problem from a solution all the time. It's literally the thing that makes or breaks whether or not something is even seen, observed, or looked into properly or within the right scope. So you have a lot of people also who abuse the information itself to try to hurt people. They will make up, slander, lies. They'll do all sorts of things like that to manipulate the context so that a person does not feel safe enough to move any further into a territory, like I said, where they could be benefiting their skill sets. So going back to the Celebrate thing, Celebrate is one such example out of a few, but some of them don't have formal names. I mean, you have situations where you can use data scraping tools to scrape someone's web information, their browser information, their passwords, their key phrases, their passcodes, their numerical passphrases, anything like that. These things can be found the same way, but it's I guess it comes down to like a tracking sort of thing. It comes down to the ability to retrace someone's steps without them formally giving permission to do so. And it has to do with server maintenance and server retention, right? So the server that is built into an app to host someone's data, meaning when you make a login, right? Username, password, whatever. If you have anything like that on a service that is being provided to you, there are separate servers apart from what your phone has that keeps or retains a copy of all of the input that you keep to it. So while you can use this to your advantage to create anonymity for yourself by saying, okay, like this is just an account that has very little, if any, information about me actually here, I can use this for X, Y, and Z and just have peace of mind and privacy, and I know who I am, and it's nothing nefarious. It's just keeping myself off of a very highly concentrated form of surveillance, right? Because these servers do survey everything. They watch everything that goes on. There are live feeds and rosters of incoming and outgoing live data that are kept. These things can be witnessed as such. They can be observed as such by parties who are in charge of administrating accounts and things like this. So that is the one side of that. But then you also have the situation where whatever it is you put into anything that is running a service for you, and it doesn't have to be on the web either. It can be something as similar to the OMACP tool, like, regular text messaging, anything like this. this is something that is equally under that type of surveillance. And it has to do with the service provision and the hardware provision that is given. So if you have an iPhone, if you have an Android phone, your iPhone is going to be responding to Apple core servers. It's going to be responding to Android, Linux, or native servers to Google. You're going to have different copies of what it is you put into the public to recall in the case that something or someone wants to go back and check your history. And you won't always have copies of those yourself. That's the point. It's the fact that if you delete your copies, that's only half of the deletion. And apps like Celebrate will go after the server collection that is native to the home server, which is not necessarily your home address on your hardware when you own a device, a phone, a computer, like a laptop, a tablet, a PC, whatever the case is. The application you're using is holding that specific copy of your transactions. And these, while they can be encrypted, they can also be decrypted, because keep in mind, encryption is sort of like a lock, right? When you encrypt something, you're turning a lock and leaving it inaccessible, but you have a key. Now, that key can be applied. If someone else has the possession of it, they can take that key and just as easily turn the lock right back in the other direction and decrypt your data. And this is why some data protocols and data measurements are used to sort of create a multi-layer encryption, so that even if one lock is unlocked, there are others to go through. And those types of locks, those programming languages, those encryption methods are not often disclosed for this reason. These are not things that people want to be found out when they're protecting their data, so they tend to keep it close to their chest, right? However, scraping tools will go into a method of use where you'll have data that is basically just picked up in whatever form it is, encrypted, decrypted, it doesn't matter, right? It'll just be lifted from a source that has been harboring the data and then carry it to another place for decryption. So you'll have CNC servers, command and control servers specifically. That's what they're called, right? CNC. The command and control server that is accessing this data, possibly from an external probe, possibly from a place where it's not authorized to be there as a collection source. They're digging for this kind of information. And this is actually legally what Celebrate did as a scraping mechanism and tool for this. But what it also did was it presented a use case where this is acceptable and legal, despite the fact that this is also what hackers have been doing informally, without credentials, without, authority to search someone's information, so on and so forth. It's basically the same concept. It's just that the people using it, like I said, the mind behind this is implementing it in different ways for different purposes, or at least it's presented this way. The risk of this being presented in a different way is still possible. It's still able to be run that way. It's still able to present poorly despite the fact. And it's just because these tools that are often used are found by people who don't have great purposes at first. They can circulate to people who have better purposes through word of mouth, which is ideal. The pollination aspect of it is okay. In fact, it's probably the best aspect of this type of information getting out, because if you have information that is useful to a criminal, but it's also useful to, someone who is behind the scenes helping, without any wanted credit, without any desired attention, things like that. You have people, and I'm not talking about newfangled vigilante justice that presents itself as such but doesn't actually get anything done. We're talking about people who have and do hide behind the sidelines, observe and check for real problems, and then just go and fix things because they feel like it's the right thing to do. And sometimes it has nothing to do with any formal sects. You don't necessarily have governments or secret agencies or secret employments in the mix. You can, but it's not always that way. Sometimes it's just good people who are fed up. There is a facet of that, and that is kind of sacred. I feel like that is to be preserved whether or not it is seen or witnessed or recognized as present, there is room to be made for that. That gives a little bit more grace. But, you know, when it comes to the typical use cases of stuff like this, you have people who just want to have their privacy, and they can't necessarily account for who would not want that for them. And I guess just to bring it back into circulation, that Celebrite and other text scraping tools, text downloading information tools, and stuff that will pull information off of servers that are using backups of your data to kind of like, you know, hold as a copy, hold as a place, like, you know, time, date, whatever, this was sent. It's just like their logs pertinent to their data collection and compliance services. Because, you know, these apps also have to respond to compliance. So compliance means, you know, you have to have a record of who is on your servers. So in the case that there really is a big problem, we can find them. That's their end of the compliance. Not everybody wants to go through that. Not everybody wants to support that with their hardware, their reporting. Not everybody likes that, right? So that's a whole other political issue therein within how the data is managed by the companies who are hosting the services on their own servers. There's a lot of red tape there, I feel, but what is important to recognize is that the app function itself is what's allowing this. And the app collection services are what are capitalizing on this kind of stuff. So if you would like to look into Celebrite, they do have a webpage. You can, you know, just Google it, or I recommend DuckDuckGo actually, because it's a little more private. You can also get DuckDuckGo plugins and stuff like that for your browser, so you can have safer browsing history if you'd like. Not that any of you are like, you know, like necessarily in need of that, but, you know, it's just good practice. It's good data hygiene and stuff like that. But yeah, I figured I'd put that out there because, you know, there are free apps out here that are being used by any single person, any old person. It doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't matter what their I guess you could say their experience, their user experience level could be, their skill set level. It doesn't matter. These things are accessible. So we need to start talking about them to make sure that everyone who has those tools in their hands has better intentions based on who knows that they're, you know, that they're there and they're made aware of. You know, it's one of those things where if you're aware of who's around you, you know your territory, the upper hand that they may have even in their inexperience is not going to surpass yours, and you have an upper hand to protect yourself. So yeah, I guess this kind of wraps up the podcast for the day. I just wanted to make a brief mention of that, give you guys some information, some fodder, you know, something to look into, something to sink your teeth into. And I'm just grateful that you're here. If you like what I do, please go like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I am Tired, TIREDG0THOX. That's Tired Goth OX. On YouTube, you can also check out my merch store. That's kissnat.myspreadshop.com/all. You can open up each of the trays of merch by clicking the images that are there and just popping open the tray, and it'll show you all the t-shirts, the hoodies, the hats, the water bottles, everything I designed by design. And you can always press the back button if you're feeling a little lost and don't know how to navigate the page. It'll all take you straight back where you need to go. And I guess with respect to anything else, you can subscribe to the Patreon per month for as little as $3 a month. It's just, you know, patron support for what I do. There's a lot of free content out there that I create, and there's also some paid content. You can also purchase a book that I've written and stay tuned for the next publications that I'm putting out via Notopic Press. That is my press and publication. I'm also looking to publish others. So if you are interested in being published and you have editorials, you have edited works that you'd like to run past me, see if it's a vibe, definitely contact me. I'm at tiredgoth_@outlook.com. That's TIREDG0TH_@outlook.com. And if you're interested in anything else pertaining to my projects, collaborations, booking classes with me, booking tech repairs, you can use that same email address to contact me. I am also at 929-443-8916. That is my number, accessible for these services, and feel free to leave a message, a text message. Let me know what your interests are pertaining to any of the current works that I'm distributing, and we'll go from there. And I'm just grateful to have you here. So I hope you all have a great day, an amazing weekend, and stay tuned for more content. There's another podcast coming up this Sunday, and sorry for the delay. So there's going to be more content. Just stay tuned. Love you guys. Take care. Bye.